As I grow older, I've become very reflective on my life and its influences. Indeed, the older I become, the more I seem to be returning to the passions I held as a teenager. And these are reflected in the eclectic content of my YouTube channels. Particularly in my main channel, The Magic of Java, you'll find some seemingly contradictory views. An interest in mysticism, but a distrust of the New Age. Admiration for folklore, but denigration, maybe that's too strong a word, of Morris dancers, druids and neo-pagans. A love for nature, especially a love of the mountains. A love of well-made products and beauty. A dislike of the inauthentic and mass-produced. A desire to keep things simple and a propensity to complicate them. Concern about the application of technology. A distrust of the assumptions of the Enlightenment. An interest in art and science, but a refusal to be atomised. Trust in the common man and community, and a distrust of power and authority. The clues on what these influences are all there, even though I rarely reflect on them. William Blake, J.M.W. Turner, John Martin, William Hulme Hunt, Ford Madox Brown, Aubrey Beardsley, Lord Byron, John Ruskin, William Morris, A.E. Houseman, Thomas Hardy, Mary Webb. Yes, I am at heart an English romantic. Strange that someone from the marshes, they had such an impact on my formative years, that I should choose to use the word English. But I cannot really claim to have been influenced by Ilo Muganwy, nor even the Mabinogion. No, Wales for me was what the Lake District was for William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Thomas de Quincey and John Ruskin. Although I later grew to love the Lake District just as much, but not the crowds and the recent gentrification. Strange that I should recoil from the recent gentrification, but admire the arts and crafts villas of the Victorian industrialists. But then I've never attempted to hide my contradictions, nor indeed my hypocrisy. So where does this love of the English romantics come from? I cannot be sure, but certainly St. Chad's, Shrewsbury's liberal Anglo-Catholic Church. It was here that I was introduced to the beliefs of the Christian socialists. But St. Chad's, like myself, is also something of a contradiction, being the establishment church for Shrewsbury, particularly since the closure of St. Mary's. And maybe this is why I am so radical, whilst being deeply conservative. The main object of religion is not to get man into heaven, but to get heaven into him. Thomas Hardy. I'm a champion of lost causes to expose the abuse of power. No man is good enough to be another's master. William Morris. But I was never really a revolutionary. Is anyone? No. We all simply want to be left alone. But greed and control will never permit this. Indeed, as I look back on my life, I have allowed myself to be obsessed with many beliefs and philosophies. But ultimately, they've always made me one-dimensional and indeed unhappy. I was more influenced by the Sermon on the Mount than the writings of Marx or the Frankfurt School. Reading Marx gave me a headache, and I believe that's William Morris, although I've been unable to authenticate this. despite having specialised in Marx and the Frankfurt School at university, as much as I am able to specialise, as always shunning atomisation. Maybe had I not been distracted by my own romantic journey, I could have attended a better university, which would have encouraged my admiration for William Blake, John Ruskin and William Morris. But I didn't, so it was Marx and a Frankfurt School to which I was drawn. I suspect my love of the Sermon on the Mount comes from my confirmation lessons at St. Chad's, as my teacher was the very Reverend Robert Willis. I must say I'm delighted to find that he's become a beacon for liberalism within the Anglican Church and a YouTube celebrity. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed for the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Yes, I'm now a Muslim. To cut a long story short, I had to become one in order to marry my wife in Jakarta. I am a Muslim and quite a devout one, within the mainstream Indonesian tradition. This is a tradition which includes Kejawen, which in itself incorporates many Hindu and Buddhist beliefs. The higher expressions of rich are really a form of Sufism. For those of you who are not Muslim, maybe even distrustful of Islam, let me say I completely understand. All I can say is that my beliefs are nothing like they're portrayed in the Western media. Indeed, as a Sufi, I often find myself completely at odds with those Muslims who focus on crime and punishment. My ecumenical beliefs certainly are not as the Western media portrays Islam. The Torah, the Book of Psalms, the Bible are holy books to Muslims, along with Al-Quran. All Jewish and Christian prophets are prophets within Islam, including Musa, Moses, Ibrahim, Abraham, and Isa, Jesus. Like Catholics, most Muslims do not really believe in an internal battle between Iblis, the devil, and Allah, God. Also, like Catholics' views on most of Jannah, heaven, and Jannah, hell, are somewhat ambiguous. We believe in angels who assist God in providing balance to the universe, and most Muslims venerate the graves of saints, Sunan. Unlike Catholics within the Sunni tradition, there really isn't a hierarchy, and an imam is simply a person who leads the prayers. So at times I myself am an imam. Unlike Catholic rituals within the masjid or mosque, rituals are limited, although for Sufi, ritualistic devotion is normal, but not necessarily in the masjid. In common with Catholics, Sufi beliefs are deeply mystical. Our mission in life is to become closer to God. We do this through love. Love is unspoken, is the most tremendous force in the world. One is amazed at the way in which people waste their time making speeches, agitating, praying even, that they might save their breath. The great lovers of the world in silence rule the world. That's Mary Webb. What should be apparent is that there is great continuity between my current beliefs and those I was taught at St Chad's. Indeed, on my last visit to Shrewsbury, which is probably also my last visit, I felt more at home at St Chad's than I did at Shrewsbury, what Shrewsbury Masjid has become. There's no contradiction in this, as a Muslim may pray anywhere. On previous visits, I was inspired by the appointment of Mother Yejide Peters as the vicar of St Chad's. Not simply an appointment, but a wonderful presence in sermons. Yes, Mother Peters was a rose, but more than that, a voice of East Harlem, just outside the quarry. So different to being told that I'm doing Islam wrong, even causing offence at Shrewsbury Masjid. It is my Kajawan and my Sufi beliefs which bring me to an interest in mysticism, an interest in why we're here on earth and what is our mission. Materialist science would claim there is no mission, no point, no soul, and no life after death, demanding that I provide evidence using their scientific method for my beliefs, whilst never demanding the same rigour for their lack of beliefs. No, they're simply my faith. I have no interest whatsoever in converting the skeptics, despite how the Western media might portray us Muslims. Yes, my beliefs originate in Java, but also from the Arab world, Persia, and above all, Spain. They only seem strange, even challenging, to those who cannot be bothered to find out what they are. I can assure you they're no more foreign or transgressive than Catholic mysticism, possibly less so. On the subject of transgression, yes, I have become somewhat learned on magic. Regular viewers of my channel, The Magic of Java, will understand that I did not take an interest in magic, but it took an interest in me. Let me reassure you that this has nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with Satanism. I suppose those being under suspicion of dancing with the devil, she had a fellow feeling with me for being mixed up with tales of witchcraft. For they'd even begun to say of me that I took the shape of a hare on dark moonless nights and went loping across the hills and had a muse running under the churchyard. Such things were first said in the idleness of mischief or to scare children, and then in the loneliness of old farms full of creakings and moanings on windy nights. They grew, and none can tell what such things will grow into at long last, nor what harm they may do. That was Mary Webb in Precious Bain. That those wishing to mislead us create and inflate stories about pizza restaurants and islands within the US Virgin Islands, all of which seems to be to misdirect us from what is really happening and the true wrongdoing behind these events. It's assumed that magical grimoires are literal and about how to control others or hoard God's resources. Indeed, that's what many magicians practice. Some folk want their luck buttered, Thomas Hardy. But for me, they're a personal alchemy, pointing to our path to God. Indeed, I can detect in all scriptures allegories about personality, psychology, and how this shapes our world. Why then would minorities in all religions insist on interpreting the scriptures literally, if this is preventing us from finding our path to God? I, a stranger and afraid in a world I never made, A. Houseman. So as my interest in magic is portrayed as Satanism, then my interest in Marx is portrayed as totalitarianism. Even that George Orwell is a champion of the libertarian right. All a camera obscura of the truth and my true interest. My argument is that war makes rather good makes rattling good history, but peace is rather poor reading, Thomas Hardy. Or that the Frankfurt School is the foundation of cultural Marxism, Adorno having written the lyrics for the Beatles. That such theories are backed by dark forces within the US should come as no surprise. In every American there's an air of incongruable innocence which seems to conceal a diabolical cunning, A. Houseman. No, what is shocking is that so many of us believe them. This also leads to my interest in folklore, for I can see in it allegories about past and almost certainly animistic beliefs, mixed with the old Catholic religion. Moralistic tales which have been obscured by a wonder at the fantastical and paranormal. Every time I meet a tree, if I'm truly awake, I stand in awe before it. I listen to its voice, a silent sermon moving me to the depths, touching my heart and stirring up my soul, a yearning to give me all. Mary Webb once more. In this folklore I can find little evidence of an ethnically Celtic past, including the Druids, nor even of a British paganism. Certainly the Romans had been pagan, and for a short while the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes and the Vikings. But there appears to be evidence that at least parts of Britain were already Christians when the Romans arrived, and certainly many more were when they left. Maybe I'm fooling myself that I knew Professor Mary Beard as a teenager, although I certainly knew a Mary who could have been there. I wonder what she'd tell me about British paganism. But then again, I've convinced myself that my Uncle Gerald, who bequeathed me shares in the Kuala Lumpur Rubber Company, was Gerald Gardner. Yes, I'm a hopeless romantic at times. You will therefore forgive me for my mistrust of neo-pagans. Maybe it's kinder to say contemporary paganism, but I'm not sure you'd understand me. And modern druids. I'm happy if they admit they owe far more to Victorian than to pre- and early history, and I'm happy if they find comfort in their beliefs. But when they attempt to enforce their beliefs upon me by appealing to a spurious ancestral past of mine, I find them no better than anyone else seeking control. It should be apparent that the influences on my beliefs are diverse, many from exotic lands, just as they were on the Romantics themselves. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately palace dome decree, where Alf the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, and down to the sunless sea, so twice 5 miles of fertile ground, with walls and towers were girdled round, and though gardens bright with sinuous rills, were blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. And that was Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who actually briefly served as a locum Unitarian minister in Shrewsbury. And herein lies another reason for my choice of the English Romantics. You see, the English Romantics, choice of the name English Romantics as opposed to simply Romantics. You see, the English Romantics were influenced by their horror at 3 major social upheavals from the time. The inclosures or enclosures, by which the common people were forced off common land and into cities or the New World. The industrialisation of traditional methods of production, Blake's dark Satanic mills, and the related development of industrial cities so wonderfully described by Engels, especially on his chapter on Manchester. Maybe surprisingly, all have strong connections to my native Shropshire. The Highland clearances, a part of the enclosures, were particularly vicious in Sutherland, on the estate of Lord Sutherland, the Marquis of Stafford, of Lillishall Hall, who went on to industrialise the eastern part of what is now called Telford. Industrialisation itself began in the Ironbridge Gorge, but was common across Shropshire with its deposits of coal, iron, clay and tar close to the surface. So that at one time Shropshire was the most industrialised place in the UK. Even in seemingly rural mid-Wales, the industrialisation of wool spinning can be seen as directly leading to its Chartist radicalisation and ultimately the Llanidloes riots. We are tomorrow's past. Even now we slip away like the pictures painted on the moving dials of antique clocks. A ship, a cottage, a sun, a moon, a noosegay. The dial turns, the ship rides and sinks again. The yellow painted sun has set, and what was a new thing gather magic as we go. The wear of the spinning wheels has ceased in our parlours, and we hear no more the treadles of the loom, the swift silken noise of the flung shuttle, the intermittent thud of the baton, but the imagination hears them, and theirs is the melody of romance. Whilst no cities developed in proud Salopia, the development of the Black Country was a direct response to the availability of coal and iron from the Ironbridge Gorge and the Clee Hills. Indeed, at that time, a part of Shropshire, known as Shropshire Detached, was within the Black Country itself. Now, maybe it's an apocryphal that as a child, Queen Victoria found the dirt and the fires of the Black Country to be so horrible that she drew the curtains on the train that she was travelling in. The same way that magic's become associated with Satanism and Marx with totalitarianism, the Luddites are seen as nihilists, resisting necessary change. But the enclosures were an explicit mechanism to redistribute wealth from the poor to the rich, and the destruction of machinery a fight for the very survival of a traditional way of life, or more precisely, a livelihood, life itself. I'm therefore happy to accept the label Luddite. Despite me embracing technology, indeed my own businesses were software based and pioneered the use of AI in the public sector. I'm not against development per se, simply the obscuring of its real purpose, and that is to redistribute wealth from the poor to the rich. Apart from the desire to produce beautiful things, the leading passion of my life has been and is hatred of modern civilization. William Morris. I myself refuse to use self-service checkouts in shops, despite them having very obliging young people encouraging us to assist them in making themselves redundant. I hear that some of the latest self-service checkouts even say, do you want to leave a tip? A tip to who exactly? A tip to the software developers? A tip to the owners? Crazy world. I was amongst the first to start using credit cards, but I now insist on cash, even if this means me not being able to purchase something that I need. It is assumed that as I age, I find new technology too difficult, whereas the truth is, I find it too sinister. In fact, despite having worked on the fringes of economic development most of my life, I'm now much more circumspect, seeing how even well-meaning programs only further increase the inequality in society. And this is such a romantic view of development. You may see this as a flippant example, but for me it speaks volumes. Morris dancing developed in the industrial heartland. In Shropshire, by miners and foundry men, laid off during the winter months, exploiting the Christmas paternalistic dole. So Morris dancers from the Ironbridge gorge would come to towns like Shrewsbury to exploit the generosity of the middle-class merchants and landed gentry, when really they were subsidising their employers in the mines and foundries, who'd simply laid them off for economic reasons, as transport became more difficult in the frozen winter. Undoubtedly, my prejudice towards Morris dancing is much more complex and irrational, but at least it provides some justification, which is at the heart of my deep-seated distrust of authority, of greed and control, for which, for me, is the true black magic. May be misplaced, but it also leads to a faith in a common man and communities. Of course, some are greedy and controlling, but those in positions of power who are much more destructive towards humanity. I've thought since that when folk grumble about this and that and not be happy, it's not the fault of creation. It's like a vast mere full of good. But what is at fault is their bucket of smallness. Mary Webb. She's lovely, isn't she? It's William Morris who expresses my feelings so wonderfully, eschewing mass production, or maybe I should say mass consumption, and expressing a desire for a few well-made possessions of craftsmanship and beauty. If you want a golden rule that will fit everything, this is it. Have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. William Morris. It's no secret that I'm finding it harder and harder to consume, as consumption is becoming increasingly virtual, locked down in a series of passwords and procedures which seem designed to give an old man Alzheimer's. Also, could this be the true reason why supermarkets constantly change their layouts? A sort of a blind man's buff for the elderly. Yeah, I'm choosing a simple life, but rapidly my choices seem to be limited. I'm leading a simple life because I'm unable to function any other way. There's no square mile of the Earth's inhabitable surface that is not beautiful in its own way, if only we men will abstain from willfully destroying that beauty. William Morris. Wordsworth, Samuel Coleridge, Thomas de Quincey and John Ruskin took themselves off to the Lake District. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye which the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasures fill, and dances with the daffodils. William Wordsworth, of course. Just as rural areas in Indonesia today are seen as wild and dangerous places, so too was the Lake District at that time. Again, the connection with Shropshire is strong, with Thomas de Quincey having written Confessions of an Opium Eater in the Lion Hotel in Shrewsbury. Whilst I spend most of my time in Jakarta, the world's second largest megalopolis, I'm happiest in the mountains of Java, where I can feel the souls of nature and the landscape itself. Green is the fresh emblem of well-founded hopes. In blue the spirit can wander, but in green it can rest. Mary Webb. For it's in nature that the myths of the Enlightenment are fully exposed. All of God's creation seems to have a soul or consciousness. This is the animism that I speak of. Just as man cannot be reduced to a machine, nor can nature. I see plenty of evidence of God's bounty and little to support the assumption of scarcity, let alone the need for hoarding, even for exchange. I can perceive how God intended man to live, and it's far removed from how most of us live today. But these are not political statements, just a profound love as nature, as the Romantics had. Indeed, I'm writing this in the mountains of Java, the inspiration for all of my most creative content. Alas, viewing numbers don't necessarily agree. I blame the YouTube algorithm, but then I would. But make no mistake, I understand how the algorithm works as well as most. My critique once again rises from my romanticism. Moreover, when I look at ancient monuments and literature, I can see little evidence of man's inevitable progress. Even the often quoted advancement in medicine have now been exposed for what they are. Just as on my mountain in Java I grow my own food, I also grow medicinal herbs. They may not always be effective, but then rarely are modern pharmaceuticals. And at least I have control of my body's own autonomy. I'm not necessarily agreeing with the likes of Graham Hancock that there were advanced societies in prehistory, simply questioning the assumptions of advancements applied within the Enlightenment, just as Romantics did. Nothing could be a more fitting conclusion than the words of William Blake. Did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here amongst those dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold, bring me my arrows of desire, bring me my sphere of clouds unfold, bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, now sure my sword sleep in my hand, till will we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land.